Hi guys, today we're going to look at how to find the midpoint of any 2 points on the xy coordinate frame. So let's start with a simple example. Here we've got 2 points, the point A and B, which have the coordinates 4, 3 and 12, 7 respectively, right? How could we find the midpoint of these 2 points? Which is, if we draw the line from A to B, the midpoint needs to be exactly halfway in between, right? That's the midpoint there. How can we find those coordinates? Well, let's think back again to the previous video. We can actually make this into a right angle triangle. Okay, there's a right angle triangle there. And we can ask the question, well, what's this distance here at the bottom? Well, that distance has got to equal 12 minus 4. Okay, so 12 minus 4 is 8. So that distance there is 8. Well, then the x-coordinate of the midpoint must be exactly halfway along that distance there, right? It's got to be halfway along. So in other words, if I start at the x-coordinate of A, which is 4, and I travel along a distance of a half of 8, which is also 4, then I'm going to get the value 8, right? See, so 4 plus 4 is equal to 8. We could do the same thing with the other side, couldn't we, right? Let's consider this side length here, right? How long is that side? Well, to find that out, we can do this y value minus that y value. So 7 minus 3 is 4. So that length there is 4. So how are we going to get to the midpoint value of y? Well, if I start at A, which has a y value of 3, then what I've got to do is I've got to travel up half of that distance of 4, which is 2, in order to get to the midpoint, right? So my y-coordinate at the midpoint is going to be 3 plus 2, which is 5. Okay, do you understand that? So what you can do is you can say that the midpoint, the x value has got to be exactly halfway between the two other x values, and the y value must be halfway between the two other y values also. Now, there's actually a simpler way for you to do that. You can use a formula, right? And the way that that formula works is, as I'm going to show you just now, right? Let's say that we've got 2 generic points here, the point A and the point B. And the point A is just general coordinates x1, y1, and the point B is general coordinates x2, y2. So we want to find this midpoint value here, m, which we will say has coordinates xm and ym. Well, the formula is that the value of the midpoint, the x value of the midpoint, is equal to x1 plus x2 over 2. And the y value of the midpoint is equal to y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So what does that mean? It means that if you want to find the midpoint, you take the 2 x values, add them up and divide by 2, will give your x coordinate, and the 2 y values, add them up and divide by 2, and that will give you your y midpoint value. Now, for those of you who aren't totally convinced by that, at the moment I can give you just a short proof if you want, but if you don't want that, feel free to skip this part of the video. Okay? All right, well, here is our midpoint value, and I said earlier that we can think of this here as a right angle triangle. Okay? Now, what's this length here? This length has got to be x2 minus x1. So then what's halfway along that length? What's this distance here? Well, it's got to be half of that. It's got to be a half of x2 minus x1, right? So let me try to draw that one now. This distance here, I'm saying, is a half of x2 minus x1. And we can think the same way, right? What's this distance here? This distance has got to be y2 minus y1. So what's half of that distance? Well, it's got to be half that, right? This distance here has got to be a half. of y2 minus y1. So then how do I get to the x-coordinate value of the midpoint? Well, actually, what I've got to do is I've got to take this x-coordinate value of x1 plus the half of x2 minus x1. Right? That's how I get that. So if you just follow me here, I'm saying the x-coordinate of the midpoint must be equal to x1 plus a half of x2 minus x1, because what I'm really saying is it is going to be this distance here, x1, plus this distance here, right? The half x2 minus x1. And if we just go ahead and expand that, we're going to get x1 plus a half of x2 minus a half of x1. And x1 minus a half of x1 is just a half of x1. And so what we end up getting in the end is a half of x1 plus x2, right? And you can do exactly the same thing for the y-coordinate as well. The y-coordinate is going to be this distance here, y1, plus this distance here, which is a half of y2 minus y1, right? That will give you your y-coordinate of the midpoint. All right. So what we've looked at is if we have any 2 points, can we find the midpoint? Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to do it in reverse, if you think of it. What I've got here is I've got one point A whose coordinates I know, but another point B whose coordinates I don't know. That's the value P and Q. But what I do know is I know the midpoint, right? So can I work backwards in order to find from the midpoint these values here, P and Q? Well, probably the simplest way is just to use the formula that I've just given you, right? Which is the x-coordinate of the midpoint value is equal to x1 plus x2 over 2. So let's just substitute in. What's our midpoint x value? Well, that is 12, right? So here we've got 12. And our x1 and x2 is 5 and p, right? So I do 5 plus p over 2. So rearranging, I multiply by 2 on both sides. That gives me 24 is equal to p plus 5. And so p is 24 minus 5, which is 19. Okay, that's the point P. How do we find the point Q? Well, that's the y-coordinate value. We just do the same thing. The y-coordinate of the midpoint is equal to y1 plus y2 all over 2. And we just substitute in. The y-coordinate of the midpoint is 9. And y1 and y2 are 4 and q, right? So 4 plus q divided by 2. So I multiply by 2 on both sides. I get 18 is equal to q plus 4, which means that q must equal 14. Okay, q's got to equal 14. So in other words, the point B is the point 19, 14. And if you want, there's another way that you could visualize that, right? Let's try to visualize it another way. I could say, how do I get from the x-coordinate of A to the x-coordinate of the midpoint? Well, what I've got to do is I've got to travel along a distance of 12 minus 5, right? 12 minus 5, which is plus 7, right? So to go from the x-coordinate of A to the midpoint x-coordinate, I've got to travel along a distance of 7. Well, therefore, I've just got to travel along the same distance of 7 to get to the x-coordinate of B, right? So the x-coordinate of B, right, which is P, is just 12 plus 7, which is 19, right? That's the same value that I've just got here and here, okay? And I can do the same thing with the y-coordinate value, right? I start with the y-coordinate value of 4 at A, and I've got to travel up how far to get to the y-coordinate of M? Well, 9 minus 4 is 5. So I travel up a distance of 5. And so if I've got to travel up by a distance of 5 to get from A to the midpoint, I've got to travel up another distance of 5 to get from the midpoint to B. So in other words, I could say that Q is equal to 9 plus 5, which is 14, right? So whichever way you think about it, you'll get the same answer in the end. Well, okay, that leaves us then with one last thing that we've got to cover, which is parallelograms, okay? A parallelogram is a quadrilateral where the two opposite sides are parallel. So these two lines here are parallel to each other, okay? And these two lines here are also parallel with each other. And they're parallel. And so those two lines are parallel and these two lines are parallel, okay? And conventionally, we will write a parallelogram or any other shape with coordinate letters A, B, C, D, E, and so forth going in rotation around the shape. So A, B, C, D. Right? That's how we would write it out. Well then, what's the thing that we've got to learn about parallelograms in particular? How does this interact with our discussion of midpoints? Well, in a very particular way. If I was to draw the line AC, right, so I go from one corner to another corner, and I was also to draw the line BD, which goes from one corner to the other corner, you will see that they intersect here at this point there. Right? Those two lines cross each other there. Now, at that point is both the midpoint of the line AC, right? It's the midpoint of this line, but it is also the midpoint of the line BD. Right? So actually, those two lines, right, this line and this line, they share a common midpoint there. So how can that be used to help us? Well, imagine that I've got this question here, right? Here's a parallelogram, and it's got coordinates there, A, B, and C, which I know, but it's got another coordinate here, D, that I don't know. How could I find that coordinate value? Well, if I draw a line from A to C, right, that line there, I can find the midpoint. Correct? I find that midpoint there. How do I do that? Well, the midpoint value here is going to be equal to x1 plus x2, right? 5 plus 21 divided by 2, right? So 5 plus 21 divided by 2. And how will I get the y-coordinate value? Well, the y-coordinate value is going to be y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So 4 plus 16 upon 2. All right, and if I follow that through, well, 5 plus 21 is 26, and 26 divided by 2 is 13. And 4 plus 16 is 20 divided by 2 is 10. So I know that the midpoint is the point 13, 10. Well, now here's how that helps us to find D, because if you remember, I said that the midpoint of BD is the same as the midpoint of AC. So in other words, I can apply the same principle. I know that the x-coordinate of the midpoint is 13. Okay, so 13. And what's that got to be equal to? Well, it's got to be equal to this x value plus that x value. So P plus 17 divided by 2. And in the same way, I could do that with the y value, right? I know that the y-coordinate of the midpoint must be 10. And so I take the two y values, q and 8, and add them up, and also divide by 2. So 10 is equal to q plus 8 divided by 2. Now if I just solve that, I'm going to get 26 here is equal to p plus 17. So p is equal to 9. Okay, And then if I find the q coordinate here, right, that's 20 is equal to q plus 8. And so q is equal to 12. So in other words, what we've been able to figure out is that the coordinate d is at the point 9, 12. Okay, and I hope that makes sense to you. And I wish you all the best as you attempt your questions later. Okay, bye guys.